But firstly, before we start, I'd just like to tell you a short story. Ooh. There we go. Perfect. Yeah, I'd just like to tell you a short story. I was in the military for the British military for 10 years, and I left in 2008, and I spent the last 7-8 years or so in the maritime security sector. But in 2010, I found myself on a vessel transiting the high-risk area of East Africa, and I very nearly ended up having a free holiday to Somalia by chance, after a Somali pirate action group boarded my vessel illegally. And at the time, I was the security team leader. We were waiting to go into Mogadishu as part of the World Food Programme, and we were there to deliver the cargo, which rice and grain and so forth. I was on board as a part of a 3-man unarmed security team, and although many of the tasks at the time we conducted were armed, due to a flag state restriction, we were not allowed to carry weapons on this particular vessel because the carriage of arms was prohibited by the flag. So many people used to say to me, well, what's the point in having a security team on board if you don't have any weapons, firearms or ammunition? And I'm sure you all have your own opinions on that. But we were there to train, to advise, to educate, and to make sure there was a plan in place for the crew so the vessel didn't get hijacked in the worst case scenario. And when I took that job, when I was sat at home in my apartment in Manchester in the UK, I realised quite early when I got that phone call to take that task that that was a very dangerous job, boarding a vessel that was going to sit off the coast of Somalia in the height of piracy. In the worst case scenario, the pirates were to attack us or illegally board our vessel, which on this particular occasion they did. I had to make sure well in advance that my focus was on people and the human factor, as we often call it in the maritime sector. So I had to make sure that the people understood what the pirates' capabilities were, understood what the tactics they used were, understood what their procedures were, and they understood what exactly I needed them to do in the worst case scenario, which happened on this particular occasion. Our vessel came under attack in mid-2010 with rocket-propelled grenades, small arms fire, and I had to take the crew down to what we called the Citadel, or a safe room. On this particular occasion, the pirates boarded for 26 hours, and I had to put the crew in the Citadel, where they stayed for the next 26 hours, and at some point during that 26 hours, I decided to make the command decision to climb up the funnel of the ship and contact the European Union naval forces in the region at the time. And luckily for me, a good plug for Inmarsat, I had one of their ISAT pros, and I was able to contact the naval forces, who then sent a helicopter which eventually scared the pirates off, who were on the bridge at the time, and they hadn't made much progress because we had a plan. We'd implemented a layered defense system. What was important about this, and why is this important story, is that the crew did everything they needed to that day, and they performed exceptionally well. But they only performed exceptionally well because they'd been trained and they were aware of what was going on. There's been many occasions where ships have been hijacked, kidnap and ransom scenarios where the crew weren't prepared and weren't trained, which cost the shipping company or the ship owner millions of dollars. 7 years on from that, the world has changed significantly, as previous speakers have already highlighted today. We're now very much immersed in what we're calling the digital era of marine operations. And although pirates and armed criminals are still very active in many parts of the world, there is a new threat which is growing and is a lot more difficult to defend against, because quite often you can't see it, hear it, and even worse still, it can come from your own people, or in cyber world, what we call the insider threat. I can promise you from experience that where maritime safety, security and risk management is concerned, that fortune always favours the prepared. It's for this reason I would briefly like to talk to you about an initiative that I set up last year called the Be Cyber Aware at Sea campaign. But first of all, I'd just like to ask you a couple of questions. Think of this as confession time for those of you who might be religious. Just with a show of hands, who can say that they've ever plugged in a USB to a laptop or a PC without scanning it first? So I would say that's a good 99% of us. What about who's in their workplace, whether it be on board or in the shipping office or in any office, who's plugged in, who saw a password with a post-it note next to a laptop or computer? Yep, that's pretty much all of us again. And how many of us use the same password for our email, our Twitter, our LinkedIn? Again, a lot. Come on, let's be honest. Good, good, good. Another 99%. Excellent. Okay, that went quite well, or maybe not. So what's the reason? What's the reason we do this? Why do we make such simple, basic mistakes and simple errors when the consequences, as we've already heard today, can be so severe? Well, to put it simply, it's because we're all human beings. Seafarers are special people. They're very committed, they're extremely dedicated, and when they're trained, they can do incredible things, as I learned 7 years ago. But they're also human beings. This means just like the rest of us in our day-to-day lives, they get stressed, they get fatigued, they get tired, they get emotional, and if they're not trained properly on how to do something, or they're not shown how to do something, they do what we all do. They cut corners, they make mistakes. And the problem is, in the maritime or offshore sector, when you make mistakes, the consequences can be very serious. We can have vessels grounding, we can have loss of life, and things can go wrong quite quickly. Shipping is a high asset value industry. Lack of awareness and training surrounding its people can cause incidents and accidents very quickly. Lack of awareness and education has the potential to cause damage, as I've just said, to property, to loss of life, and also pollute the environment on a scale that is probably unlikely to be equalled in any other sector. Cyber is an interesting subject, as technology for operational and informational purposes is at the core. But as we know today, maybe not in the future, but certainly today, humans are the end interface. The terminology human factors, or the human element, in the shipping and offshore world often draws attention to important issues affecting seafarers or the offshore workforce, but rarely are those issues fully addressed in their entirety. Personally, I find it extremely concerning that human factors, so long identified as significant in the majority of marine incidents, are not the focus of all our attention when it comes to improvements for security and safety. And cyber security and the cyber risk should be no exception. Cybersecurity is listed as a Tier 1 threat to most nation states and most businesses. So why is it not the same in shipping? I'm not here to scare people. I'm not here to scaremonger. I'm not here to encourage you to invest large amounts of money in cyber risk management. For me, it's about developing people who are today the greatest asset on board, but also the biggest vulnerability. Technology has a very important role to play in shipping, and in terms of cyber risk mitigation, although the future landscape may change, as we've already heard today, right now we must focus on our people. Technology can be patched and often corrected, but people can't. It's not a secret that it's not a secret that the more communications and connectivity we have on board, the more vulnerability we have to deal with from a risk management perspective. For the last 2 years, as well as running a training business in the maritime sector, I've been studying for a master's degree in maritime security, which I finished last year. I spent 2 years studying, and my thesis, as you can see, was called Cybersecurity, the Unknown Threat at Sea. During those 2 years, I wanted to answer two key questions. One was, what does the shipping company understand about maritime security threats? And secondly, how did they manage those security threats? During my research, I spoke to 100 ship security officers, quite often the master or the chief officer, but ultimately the person on board responsible for security. I spoke to 150 company security officers from some of the largest shipping companies in the world down to the smallest. The person responsible for security on land from a fleet perspective. And then I also spoke to the IT departments, or the head of IT departments, to see their take on things. And the results were quite astonishing for me as a risk manager. 67% of the company security officers told me that cybersecurity was not a serious threat. More often than not, they told me, don't speak to the IT department, it's not my issue. 91% of the ship security officers, the person on board physically responsible for cyber risk or information security, said that they didn't have the training, the education, the knowledge, the skill set to be able to deal with the cyber threat. But even more concerning than that was when I spoke to the IT departments. 100% of all IT security managers that I spoke to told me they provided no training at all on board their vessels for crew members. But here's where the paradox lies. 53% of those people who didn't train their crews told me that they'd implemented systems and policies for information security and cyber risk management, which I found a complete paradox and quite worrying and concerning. As a result of this, this was the catalyst, the 2 years research for a campaign I set up 6 months ago called the Be Cyber Aware at Sea campaign. It focuses on the biggest vulnerability on board today, which is of course the human element, the crew members, the people. It's a free global awareness initiative to encourage maritime cyber security, education, training and information sharing. And it's completely focused on the people, as I say. There's a free website you can visit, becyberaware@sea.com. Lots of useful resources on there. Posters to download, all the industry guidelines that have been released by different industry stakeholders. There's videos, onboard messaging campaign, which has been very popular, 20,000 downloads in the last 3 months, catchy one-liner messages. As we already heard from previous speakers on this panel, it has to be simple. People have to be made aware. Cyber is often seen as a technical subject where people like me who aren't technical find it difficult to comprehend and digest. So using very simple, innovative messaging, we've allowed the shipping industry to understand and get to grips with what is a big concern. We also have a newsletter. Again, Safety4SEA have supported us very well, along with many other shipping companies and key maritime stakeholders. If you'd like to receive your copy, it will keep you up to date with guidelines, good case studies, what we've seen, or bad case studies, should I say. Please do register your details via the website. And finally, what I would say is that one message, stronger together, be cyber aware at sea. It's been a real pleasure to talk to you today, but just to finish, I'd like to say that the cyber threat is very real. Just like I learned off the coast of Somalia 7 years ago, seafarers are incredibly special people that when they're trained right, they can do extraordinary things. I believe that we have a responsibility to inform and educate them on the maritime cyber threat that will continue to grow and evolve. Crews will eventually get smaller, as we know. Ships will become more sophisticated and probably eventually automated. And I can tell you today that online is very much the new frontline, which is why we should all be cyber aware at sea.